noticing you for ages, Josh.
Yeah,
It's been away and you're back. It's good. Oh yes, of course. So Leeanne Enoch, Minister for Communities and Housing, Minister for Digital Economy and Minister for the Arts. Just waiting in now, guys. Okay. Well, thanks so much for coming along today. And of course, here we are at Tanamera. We're standing outside a development, a complex of 9 units that will add to the tally, if you like, of buildings, social housing dwellings that we will have completed since 2015. And we're hurtling towards 4,000 as a result of this work that we're seeing behind us. And we know that in Queensland, just like the rest of Australia, that we are feeling the housing stress as a result of course, in Queensland, mass migration. We've had several flooding events that have impacted housing stock, and of course we continue to see building supply issues, workforce issues, and of course delays to building because of weather events that we continue to see in Queensland. But that's why last year the Palaszczuk government committed a record amount of investment for social and affordable housing in last year's budget as part of our second action plan of our housing and homelessness strategy. $2.9 billion, including a $1 billion housing investment fund that will allow us to draw down on that fund for years to come to build more social housing. Now I can confirm that since 2015 we've seen over 4,887 commencements of social housing, and certainly in the last year of our second action plan, so the very first year of our second action plan, we had a goal of 727 commencement. We exceeded that and had 832 social houses commenced, and I can confirm today that we have now commenced over 907 new social homes under that program as part of our second action plan. And as I said, that joins with the 4,887 commencements we've seen since 2015. So we are building more property every day to be able to support the needs of Queenslanders. And certainly what we've seen since 2015 is over 4,000 completions. So this one here will certainly be able to ensure that we are moving as quickly as possible to build more and more social housing. This particular construction, almost complete, $2.9 million. This complex has 9 one-bedroom units. It includes 4 ground floor units, specially designed for older people and people with disability. We're building them to platinum and gold standard, and it's a great partnership with Nileport Projects, who are putting on the finishing touches right now as we're speaking, fitting those internal units, painting the walls, finishing off the external earthworks to make it a real home for people, and we expect that tenants will begin to move in next month. So we're really at the very end of this particular project, and we're seeing this right across Queensland with more and more commencements and completions. I've been able to turn sod, hand over keys, visit new tenants in hundreds of new dwellings right across the state since becoming the Housing Minister at the end of 2020. And certainly in Logan, where we are right now, we're seeing more commencements over the next few years, 178 to be exact, and that's on top of the 361 that we've already commenced under our housing strategy. And of course, social housing is just one part of the service that the housing and service centres provide to Queenslanders. Not only are we building new properties, but we're also looking at new initiatives to be able to add stock to the system. And recently I was able to publicly announce our Help to Home program, which is a head leasing program looking for 1,000 new properties to enter into the system. And looking really for those investors and homeowners that might have properties that are new to market or have been in short holiday lets, so Airbnb, etc., or might have been their holiday home, to bring them forward to the Queensland Government, where we'll give you 2 years guaranteed rent, we'll give you 3 months advance payments to ensure that we're taking care of that relationship. And what will happen as a result of that is those properties will come into the social housing stock and be available to people who really need them. And we're looking for 1,000 of those. So if you are somebody that fits the bill, please come forward and help another Queenslander get a roof over their head. And of course, recently the Premier and I both announced a $16 million immediate housing response package, very much targeted at families so that we could secure or sustain housing. That means an extra $7 million funding for our existing rental security subsidy scheme to assist up to 700 families. Right now, previous to this funding, we would have this rental subsidy scheme that would see about 6 months and $5,000 to help subsidise rent to keep people in their properties or to actually gain a property. We're extending that to 12 months and $10,000 to be able to help families in particular who are being impacted by the housing stresses we're seeing right now. And of course, further funding for our specialist homelessness services and $3 million towards support workers to those funded specialist homelessness services to support families. So there are an array of support services that are in place to support Queenslanders during what is an unprecedented time. Not only are we building more properties to add to our housing stock, but we're looking for new initiatives and of course delivering more support services to Queenslanders who are in need. Any questions? Yeah, so in Queensland we operate a social housing register, so if people are in need they come and work with the Housing Service Centre. The Housing Service Centre staff assess people's needs. So for instance, if you come and you've been impacted by domestic or family violence, then you are supported immediately that day to ensure that you've got a safe property to live in and stay in that night and for the short term, and then we work with those individuals on what their needs might be. So sometimes they might move into the private market through some of our subsidy schemes or our private rental products. And so it really changes and depends on the exact needs of the individual or the household. But certainly this register allows us to look at the precise needs of that household and then provide the product that might fit that. Sometimes it might be social housing, sometimes it might be some other product. But we allow people to stay on the register for a certain amount of time, and of course that has been part of the review of the social housing register by the Auditor General, for instance. Yeah, so we obviously we look at households because a household is made up of individuals. Sometimes a household might have, for instance, like one household that I met in Cairns where there were 5 children and 2 adults, so those 5 children don't need all their own houses, if you know what I mean. A 2-year-old doesn't need their own house. So we always look at a household because that's what we're trying to match the product with. So in terms of the register, it's a much easier way and of course a much more sensible way to look at matching properties with households rather than individuals. So every year the data is released, the housing register data is released, usually in September. Of course we were able to release some of that rough data in terms of households just last week in estimates, and we saw a slight reduction in the number of households on the social housing register, which I think, we saw last year a bit of a stabilising, about an 8% increase. Prior to that, we were seeing like 22% increases, and this year we've seen a slight decrease, and some of that has become obvious as a result of our returning to business as usual post-COVID. During COVID, we didn't do the housing inspections, we didn't touch base with as many people as you'd expect because we wanted people to stay in situ. But as those normal services are resumed, we're able to interact a little bit more, and some people are coming off the social housing register as a result of that because they may no longer need social housing, or their needs have changed completely and are no longer on that register. I can give you the exact number, but it is just over 29,000 29,000 households on the register currently.
Since 2018, something like 15,000 people have been added to the register. About more than half of those very high needs. It feels like, and this has certainly been in the headlines for many months, it feels like the government can't keep up right now.
Well, of course, the Queensland government or the state government is not the only player in this space. What we saw from the former LNP federal government was some $100 million stripped out of the Queensland budget around housing and homelessness. And certainly, their approach to housing was very hands-off. We saw them walk away, for instance, from the National National Remote Indigenous Housing Program and partnership. Now, of course, we've got a new federal government. They've made a commitment of a $10 billion housing investment fund. We're seeing a commitment, of course, of about 30,000 new social and affordable homes, and we want Queensland to get the fair share of that. There is a role for federal government to play in all of this. The state government has made a record investment, $2.9 billion. We are about to see, 4,000 completions since we've come to office, with this property behind us being part of us getting there. Of course, we're dealing with the multiple compounding issues that all of Australia is dealing with, although we have extras with regards to the extreme weather events that we've been experiencing here, particularly the flooding events at the beginning of this year. But we are not alone in this. The federal government needs to play a role, and certainly I've raised that with the new housing minister. So it is an investment fund, and it's exactly that. And I think it's an incredibly exciting and productive fund, because when you think over the years to come, that fund will always exist. We'll always be able to draw down to that from that fund and see that fund grow, and that's what we want. Do we need to stop that sound? I think they'll go and tell him to just stop for a second. Sorry. As you can see, they're in a rush as well because they're worried about the weather. And when you see this right across Queensland, I've been to building sites where they've had like 52-day delays because of weather. This is the problem that we're seeing right across Queensland. So that's why they're continuing on the work even though we're standing here. Just to the $1 billion housing investment fund. This is something that we're seeing in other states that have been developed, and certainly federally the $10 billion housing investment fund gives us that certainty and surety about the future. I think it's a fantastic addition in terms of being able to draw down on that funding into the future. We don't know what the future will look like, and that's why we need to be able to secure that funding for social housing, specifically for social housing and affordable housing into the future. I can get you that exact number, but we have an envelope of funding over a 4-year period of just over $1.8 billion to build new social and affordable social housing in particular in my department alone.
Yes, governments don't want people ending up on this register to begin with. Have you done, or has your department done any investigative work into why people are ending up on the register in higher numbers than we've ever seen?
Yeah, obviously because the housing register, as I said, has at the time was created just as we came into COVID. So in 2019, a particular system was put in place, and then of course COVID hit. And now we've got this new world order that we're going to have to get used to. It's not business as usual pre-COVID. It's a new way of looking at things. And certainly last year, just a few months after I became the housing minister, I asked the department to have a look at the social housing register, start contacting everybody on that register, see how they were tracking as a result of COVID, and to have a look at the kinds of systems we had in place and whether they were fit for purpose now, given that we're living in this new world post-COVID. And so the department has been doing a great deal of work, and certainly the Auditor General's report has assisted in sharpening some of that work, and obviously those 8 recommendations have been accepted, and the department continues to do some work in that space.
Are you worried with how some voters or Queenslanders who are struggling and are on hard times and have been waiting years, and they see things like the Olympics and the sort of big ticket items when people are still waiting to get a house?
Yeah, well obviously housing is a full continuum. We're seeing those pressures not just in the area that the government, my department has responsibility for in terms of social housing, but we're seeing in the ability to purchase a home And we're seeing that knock-on effect in terms of the investors and the private rental market. All of these factors are playing a role. But and we're not the only state that's experiencing that. I know that particularly regional Victoria, for instance, is experiencing something similar where people have made that tree change or that sea change, and that's putting pressure on that local housing market. And we're seeing that right across our state as well. But that's why, for me, the Olympics gives us this great opportunity to look at the kinds of infrastructure we build now that can support not just housing, but also the infrastructure around communities, how we connect as communities into the future. Yeah, well, certainly, when I was a kid and I grew up not far from here in social housing with my mum and dad and 3 brothers, it was a very different kind of system. You just put your name on a list and you just waited your turn, and that's how it was. These days it's very different. The social housing register is about, like, if you are in immediate need or if you are unable to sustain your own tenancy elsewhere or your own ability to have a roof over your head, the social housing register becomes that safety net. And certainly that will always be in flux. There will always be people coming in and going off the social housing register, as you'd expect, because needs change. Sometimes families need that extra little bit of help for a few years and then they're off on their own. Sometimes they might need it for longer. There are some households who are on the social housing register now who've been on for many years, who've been offered many different social housing properties, but it doesn't meet what they would like for their own lives, so they sustain their private rental market product. So, it's really about being very person-centred, understanding the needs of the household that you're working with, and that's how we're doing it here in Queensland. Well, of course, as I said, that changes as the needs of those who come forward change. What we're seeing, one of the things that is very concerning, is the increase of households presenting with domestic and family violence concerns. That has quadrupled over the last 4 years. And so if you are presenting at a housing service centre as a result of domestic and family violence, you are seen immediately that day and placed somewhere secure so that you can stay safe. And that has become a real concern, that quadrupling of that number. But this will change as society changes. It would be, I guess, not realistic to think that would mean that there'd never be anybody on a social housing register, because needs change every day, every week. And so the social housing register remains that safety net, and it will remain that safety net as long as we keep that person-centred approach to social housing in our state. Thank you. Thanks so much. Come and have a look at it.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't go to.